The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Alrighty, folks. This is Bill Wolf. I'm here with Grant Fritchie. We're going to wait to let a few more attendees trickle in here, so we'll give it a few minutes. You guys know me. I am Bill Wolf. I'm not sure what SQL events are coming up, but I'm hoping that you guys were able to see Grant yesterday. Grant and Steve and Aunt Kathy yesterday at SQL in the City. And
yep, great event.
Yeah, it was. And then
the recordings are on YouTube, so you guys can go and watch them if you want to.
Oh, fantastic!
Just can't ask live questions anymore.
Yeah, I didn't get to watch all of it because I kind of got engrossed in code.
That does happen to us, doesn't it?
Well, I feel like I'm after this white whale because there's this view that calls a function in a where clause that this function takes 4 arguments from different tables, and it's horrendous. So I'm trying to make it set based, but I can't get the data to be the same. And I feel like I'm Ahab with the white whale because I can't give up on this, but I've been working on it for a long time, but I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong, and it's possible I may not be able to do it. It's possible it has to be set based. It's coming from a warehouse, so I'd have to show it to you, but it's possible. So I didn't get to watch it all, so.
Cool.
As if you don't have enough to do. Alrighty.
I don't mind people sending me stuff. I just never make promises I'm going to do anything with it.
Absolutely. And we have the past recordings are coming out soon, right?
Yeah, they should be out very soon.
Okay, so
if the other stuff coming up is people haven't looked into it, you should be looking at Tech Outbound. That's going to be in the end of February when it's nasty cold. You can go down to Miami, hop on a cruise ship, and get some learning in.
So is this just SQL Server, or is it a whole bunch of other stuff?
It's app dev and database stuff, both. Steph Locke, Kevin Klein, Tim Ford, myself. Let's see, what's his name? Chris Woodruff. A bunch of great it's a devs and DBAs all mixed together, kind of like DevOps.
Right. Huh. Interesting.
That's coming up in February.
Okay.
Other thing in February I know of is SQL Bits.
Yes. For those in Europe.
In the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll put that in here. So SQL Bits is, yeah. Oh, I keep wanting to go to that, but I keep. Well, great.
It's a hell of an event. It really is. I'll be talking on execution plans, and I'll also be doing DevOps. Hey, isn't that funny?
I'm better at execution plans than I am DevOps. I do this as much to learn from you guys as I am anything else.
Oh man, I'm telling you, I really do love the topic. Well, you want to go ahead and get started? It's a couple of minutes in. We can.
Yep, we'll go ahead and get started.
Late? No, it's late.
Right. So, all right, Grant, I'll let you take it away, and I'm gonna mute myself. So have fun.
Okay, cool.
I'll watch for questions.
All right. Well, if there's a really important questions come up, feel free to interrupt. I mean, I have no problem with that as we go. All right. All right. Let's get started. I've got a couple of goals in the session. I'm hoping that I'm hoping we can talk some methodologies and hoping we can talk some best practices. But honestly, the real focus of anytime we talk about DevOps, it's not about tooling, guys. Tooling is the easy part. I work for a tool vendor. I can definitely sell you tools that will help you do your DevOps. That's not a question. That's easy. The hard part of DevOps, the truly difficult part of DevOps, is you actually need to change the culture that you work within. And that's difficult. You have to change your attitudes about how you do things, and you've got to get management buy-in, and there's just a whole lot to it. The tooling, which we will do a demo of, I promise, is very simple. It's simple is a big word, but it's not hard. The hard part is really making the changes to your environment. Now, my name is Grant Fritchie. I work for Redgate Software. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I've been doing this kind of stuff for a very, very long time. That's all you really need to know. I'm old. I have gray hair. But anyway, I work for Redgate. I've got a couple of books out, Query Performance Tuning and Execution Plans. There will be new versions of these books coming out next year that include Azure SQL Database and SQL Server 2017. So all kinds of fun stuff is going on right now. So you'll see a 5th edition on the Query Tuning book and a 3rd edition on the Execution Plans book, and I'm really excited about both. So look for those. But if you've got questions after today on these topics or any others, DevOps or tuning or any of that fun stuff, get a hold of me. You've got my email address right there, you've got my blog right there, and you've got my Twitter handle right there in front of you. So you can get in touch, and I will do my best to try to help you out as best I can. Now, DevOps, let's talk about it. Now, Gartner has got a nice, long-winded, detailed explanation for exactly what DevOps is. So you guys can, read through that there, and now you know everything you need to know. So the session's over. We're going to go home. No, I'm kidding. Don't hang up. We're not done yet. The thing is that we do need to focus in DevOps, right? It's not simply, this Gartner definition's okay, but it de-emphasizes words because it has so many. That you lose track of what's going on. I've said it already once. I'm probably going to say it a couple more times. The culture around DevOps is what is the most difficult thing to do. You have to change the way your company organizes its development, the way you organize your operations. Now, this is a DevOps for the DBA, so we're going to be focused a lot on data and talking about data and databases and all that fun stuff. But the thing to remember is that it's still a change that you guys are going to have to make. The culture to support DevOps must change. A lot of companies have gone out there and they've hired like a DevOps guy, right? Oh yeah, we've got a DevOps consultant. He's coming in and he's going to teach us DevOps, and then they're going to show you Team City and they're going to show you Octopus, and you're going to have Team Foundation services all set up, and now you're doing DevOps. No, not at all. You've got to start shifting the culture, so the culture is starting to think about the concept that there is not a development team. There's not an operations team. There's not a SAN team, a DBA team. There is a DevOps team. Everybody is involved. We have a common goal, and making that change in your culture is very, very hard, but it's fundamental to making the process work. Now, the other thing you're going to have to start to think about too is you've got to bring in the concept of agile and lean. Now, these things actually started out, funny enough, in auto manufacturing. And if you think about auto manufacturing and quick and agile, unless you've done a lot of research recently, like I have in the last few years, you don't think about things moving quickly in automobile manufacturing. But the fact of the matter is it does. And especially the people who've adopted these types of approaches, agile and lean, moving just enough things just in time. Only making the changes you have to make, but being willing to make any change at any moment is what agile and lean is all about. This is something else that you'll have to work into the cultural changes that you're making within your system, is the idea of adopting an agile and lean practice, so that you're moving quickly, you're willing to move quickly, you're willing to make lots and lots and lots of changes. It's just you want to make small changes quickly. Be agile, move fast, but it's not, you're not gonna, even if you're trying to steer an aircraft carrier, you can steer an aircraft carrier in an agile fashion, but that steering is still not going to happen overnight. It takes time, it takes a little bit of work, you've got to plan ahead, but that does not mean that you're not still making lots and lots of small course adjustments as you go. You are, and ultimately it will get you turned around and going a different direction. And that's what we're talking about. Lots and lots of small, quick movement, right? Agile and lean. Further, it always does that. Why does it jump like that? Okay, sorry about that. I've worked on these slides and it makes me crazy. in order to arrive at an agile, lean culture, we have to talk about people. It's really all about the people. It's not about technology. This is, technology is ones and zeros, and largely it's about that simple, right? You flip the bit and everything's cool. But people don't work that way, and we have to get people on board. We have to get management on board. They have to buy into this process of saying, we're going to change the culture. We're going to move in an agile and lean fashion. We're going to do lots of small deployments, and we're going to collaborate. We're going to cross these walls. We're going to eliminate these walls between our development processes and our production processes, and we're going to knock them down and make it so that we can move quickly and easily to, and then talk to each other through that process. If you're not taking the people into account when making these changes, you're not going to be able to make the cultural shifts you need in order to support this. And then finally, and I always bring it up last, we are going to talk about automation and tooling. And it's a necessary evil here is we do have to talk automation. The last thing you want to be doing is an agile, lean, people-oriented culture where you do everything manually, where you're building out scripts line by line, where you have to review the 10,000-line script before it can move from dev to QA, and then you have to review that same 10,000-line script before it can go from QA to financial testing, and then you've got to review that. Come on, guys. That kind of stuff is to go away. It has to shift off. We're going to move quickly, and the way we can move quickly but accurately, quickly but correctly, is through automation and tooling, right? If you were relying upon me to write the T-SQL script the same way every time, you guys are in serious, serious trouble. A lot of when I talk about this stuff, I'm using myself as the worst case example. Because I'm pretty frightening when it comes to manual processes. I screw up, I skip steps. Come over to my house and look at some of the shelves I've built. You'll spot where I've made a few shortcuts and had to fix a few things. I have a tendency to kind of forget to follow every step of the process. That's why I love automation so much, is because it sort of eliminates me from the whole error chain, right? But that's what you also need to think about for yourselves. You're going to have to think about how you can automate yourself out of a job. That will not remove your job, I promise you it won't. In fact, you'll have more work to do, not less, because as you start to adopt this stuff, you can get someplace. And so this is what DevOps is about. So we can simplify what Gartner has put forward, and we can arrive at a really nice, simple explanation. DevOps is an agile culture that better supports collaboration between people, that uses automation and tooling in support of the process. So what we're talking about is an agile culture with people working on process, and then the automation and tooling come last, right? If we've got a process that we trust, and when I say we, I mean you and I as human beings, we've looked at this process and we say, hey, we've got checks in place that prevent us from doing something stupid. And if we do something stupid and new, we will put a new check in place to prevent us from doing that in the future. And it will be part of the automation process that we ensure that we've got a process that supports us. And this is what I see as DevOps. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of hard to arrive at. It takes a lot of work, but this is what we're going for. An agile culture, collaboration between people, process that's supported by automation and tooling. Okay? Bill, any major questions at the moment? I'll pause right here.
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, cool. All right, well, let's keep going. So the classic picture that you'll see is development, right? So we start development, over on the left, and then we'll go through a build, and then we'll go through an integration and performance processing. Then we'll go through pre-prod or staging or whatever we call it, and then finally we'll arrive at our production database. Yay, we've automated. Yay, we're all good. Aren't we heroes? But the fact of the matter is that has anyone ever done this one time? Nope. Guaranteed. You do it once, release 1.0 goes out the door, we win. Hey, somebody found a bug. Ah, crud. Okay, well, we're back to starting it again, right? So the thing is that the pipeline process is really a bad way to think about this whole thing. It's going to limit your thinking. It's going to introduce problems. What we want to really think about this is as a circle, right? This is a constantly evolving, constantly rolling process. It's never something that stops. It's not something we do once. It's not a pipeline in which you put some stuff in the front end and stuff comes out the back end and yay, we win. It's a circle. It's a constantly moving wheel. So we're going to start doing development, right? And as we figure out what we've got developed, we're going to do a build. If the build works, fantastic. We'll move it off to testing and validation. Assuming that works, we'll package that stuff up and define it as a release, put it out into our production environment where we monitor and watch it. Over time, we make sure that we've got backups in place and all that fun stuff. And then as we move forward, we will provision new copies of that production stuff into our development environment in some safe fashion, so that development can continue building new stuff, validating and testing, and you get the rest of the story. It keeps going, non-stop, continual development and deployment. It doesn't change, it doesn't stop. And if we're adopting an agile process, we're talking about lots and lots and lots of small changes, so that you're going to see this whole process occurring faster and faster and faster over time. And so think about it like a wheel, think about it like a circle, and you'll be a lot happier with the way you set it up. Now, none of this that I'm proposing eliminates the seawall, right? We are not talking about knocking down protection for our production environment. You're still going to have security on production. You're still going to ensure that only a limited group of people have access to production, because you're still going to have compliance, regulation, the FTC, the SEC, whatever bodies in the EU are going to be enforcing the GDPR. All of these things are still going to be coming at you from your production environment. Therefore, you must have the same kinds of protection that you have today. None of this stuff eliminates that. So we're not talking about, well, DevOps is all about just giving your developers full access to production as SA. No, it is not. That is a lie. Anyone who is telling you that is DevOps, they are A, a developer, and B, wrong, and C, not really doing DevOps, right? DevOps is not dev, oh, and maybe there's some operations in there somewhere. If we need backups, we'll call you. No, it's DevOps. It's dev and operations. And they are two words together. Therefore, they are two teams together, two approaches together, two processes together. And that operations process, which is part of the development process, does require certain levels of protection in the production environment. And nothing I'm going to go over today changes that. Nothing. So please remember that. Don't get caught up in being scared that we're exposing production. We're not. In fact, the entire DevOps process, putting in place additional testing, putting in place what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is a shift left mentality to move testing closer to the dev environment, to fail faster earlier in our processing, is an added protection for your production environment. So we're not removing protection. We're not tearing down the seawall. In fact, we're going to build it up a little higher and add a bit more protection layer to your production server. And please don't forget that. That's a really important thing. A lot of people start to hear, we're automating things up to, or we're automating things into our production environment, and they're just going, oh my God, we're exposing the world to all of our data. And the fact is, no, you are not. You do not want to do that. Legally, you can't do that depending on your situation. So I'm not suggesting you do that. And in fact, I would never support something along those lines or suggest that you do those things. But I'm telling you that you're going to add additional protection to your production environment, and you're not going to take away the stuff that you have today. Granted, you think that one of your protections is that Mark I eyeball. that you're going to go out and review that 150,000 line script. You're going to catch every error inside of it, and your Mark 1 eyeball will protect that production environment. And we all know that you don't read every line on that script. That what you do is compile it. What you do is run it through some kind of compiler. What you do is test it, and then if there are errors, you catch those. But you could automate that process, and you know that too, right? So that's what we're going to get to, is automating that kind of Mark 1 eyeball stuff in order to further our protection of our production environment. All right, now we are going to talk about shift left. Shift left is very fundamental to what we're doing. And the idea here is that we're going to make our development environments and our development processing look as much like production as possible. That does not say we will move production data into development, right? That's not what I said. Make dev look as much like production as possible. Meaning, where you can, you move production down. Sure, if you're in an unregulated industry, and how many of those are left in the world, I don't know, not that many. But if you're in an unregulated industry, if you're in a privately held company, you're not worried about insurance, you're not worried about the GDPR, you're not in violation of any of these kinds of laws and rules. And if you are, wow, you're in a weird situation, because almost every single one of us is involved in this stuff. Then you can just move production down. The rest of us are going to have to clean data and ensure that that we're protecting our production data. We're going to have to do things, but we're going to make it as much as we can, as much as possible, move our production stuff into dev. Now, why? What's the goal here? The goal here is to make things in dev look like production in order to make them fail like production before anything leaves the development platform. And if we're talking about a developer's laptop or a developer's VM or a shared VM, right, any of these particular details of the process, I don't care what they are, but we're going to make sure that whatever they are developing on, as much as we can, it looks like production in order to assist in failing early. It's a vital part of the process, and it's again it's one of those mental shifts we're going to have to make. Unlike the protection, where we're protection, I'm asking you make no mental shift there, right? Stay that paranoid DBA, stay on top of protecting your production environment. But now we're going to start making some changes. We're going to move as much of that production environment as we can down to dev, in order for those guys to have something that mirrors as close as possible our dev environment. And I know somebody's going to say, Grant, we've got a 50 terabyte database for production. I can't possibly put 50 terabyte database on our 20 developer laptops, because they're not that big. And it's like, you're right, you can't do that. So you'll have to do something else. But you do want to make sure that you've got something that looks as much like production as possible in the hands of your developers. And if that means it's smaller, that means it's smaller. It means if you've used some tooling or some other process to make it happen, great. There are definitely tools available that can help with this, but you're going to have to arrive at that. So let's talk about, if we're talking about development, database development, one of the first mental shifts that we have to make is we must stop thinking about databases as databases. The database outside of our production environment is nothing but code. Now, production environment, totally different story. There's data that must be retained, there's all that fun stuff, but inside the development environment, database is code, database is code, database is code, and you've got to start thinking about it that way. Which means a few things. First up, we want to start source controlling all of our code, all of our database stuff. Everything goes into source control. Store procedures, table definitions, foreign keys, all the fun, everything goes into source control. Why? Because source control is the known state, right? We know what version we're on, we know what branch we're on, we know exactly where it's at, we know the changes that have been made, we know who made those changes, because everything is done through source control. And you think to yourself, well, I'm a DBA, I've got SA privileges, I can go into the database and make changes anytime I want in dev. And you're right, you could do that. You'll be violating your own process, because your process is going to say, my database is code, I will put everything into source control. If I need to make a change, I will check it out of source control, make the change, check it back in. I will branch source control, make the change, merge my branch. However your processes are set up, you will do that. Further, you're going to isolate stuff. you're going to make it so that any one developer can burn the house down, right? They can screw up, make all the mistakes in the world, but not affect the next developer, or best of all, you, right? You're going to isolate stuff off so that work can continue, people can make mistakes in an isolated environment, and then you're going to start working off testing, right? So it's all about testing. Now that hooks us right into the whole DevOps circle, right? We're starting with development. Now moving on, we're going to move up to build. So when we say build, what do we mean? Well, build, there's various ways to do a database build. Now there's state-based management. Now state-based is very simple. A lot of us use it, and the idea is you're making comparisons. You're making a comparison between a database and a database. I know people out there that are using comparison tools, and there's a whole bunch of them out there. I'm not going to list them. I know a particular vendor that I prefer, but I'm not going to tell you what that is right now. You compare between two databases. So you've got your dev database and your QA database. You make a comparison. You've got state 1, state 2. You get a script that will migrate from state 1 to state 2. That's awesome. You can do it with source control. You can also do it with backups. So you can do it with some other processes, but it's all about state-based. Now, the next possibility that you could do for building databases is migrations approach. And migrations approach is actually kind of sweet. There's a real big strength to it and one giant weakness. And the idea is that scripts build on scripts, which continue to build on scripts, which build on scripts, which build on scripts. And so if you add a column to a table, you've got a script that adds a column, and off you go. If you create a store procedure, you've got a script that adds a store procedure, and off you go. And if you say, oh, wait a minute, remember that table, we got to add another column to it, you add another script that adds another column, and off you go. And now, so you've got a series of migration scripts, right? One moves from nothing by adding a table. One adds a column to that table. One adds a store procedure. One adds another column, and you just keep going on and on and on. And it works extremely well. It's very easy to understand. You've got things laid out, but there has one gigantic weakness. What if you drop a column? Oh wait, it's dev. We need to add that column back out. Oh, I'm sorry, the company's changed their mind. We need to drop that column again. Hang on, we've clarified the processes. We're going to add the column. We're going to change the data type. No, no, no. There's a disagreement. Just get that out of there. We don't want it right now. Hang on, put it back in. All right, so cool. Now we've got 20 scripts, give or take, that arrive at the end point for this one table, right? We've added the column, dropped the column 19 times or something. What happens when we run that on our production server that has 100 million rows? Oh no, right? Oh my God, that's going to be horrific. And so what we want to arrive at is this idea of a hybrid build processing. A hybrid build processing is that we can flatten out those migration scripts and identify moments in time where we say, okay, we now have a state. We're now at version 1, and now it's a new baseline. We've reestablished that as 0, and now we will begin to have migrations on top of version 1. And then at some point we're going to go, well, we have version 1.1. We flatten everything out again. There's no more migration scripts from 1 to 1.1. It's now just 1.1, and then we do migrations as necessary to get us to 1.2, et cetera, and you get the idea from there. But that's really the goal, is to try to get to that hybrid approach. State-based has some problems because it's hard to deal with data loss sometimes. Migrations has problems because what I said before, but a hybrid approach of flattening as we go along and then using migrations to deal with the changes, generally that works best of all. So that's what I would aim for, and move towards. And so now we're back on the circle, right? So we've developed, we've built. Let's talk about validating and testing. Now, don't make the mistake I made. When I read a book on test-driven development, and I said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a unit test for every object in the database, which means a unit test for the tables, and a unit test for the store procedures, and a unit test for the triggers, and I ended up writing, about 1,000 unit tests, of which there were probably 5 that were useful. The rest were junk. They were just complete garbage. And what I would suggest when we start talking about database testing, especially when we talk about internal tests, not the external test. If the application developers write a test, that's great, they've got their test. But I'm talking about if you're starting to write internal tests in the database, I would suggest you only write tests for things that are going to break, right? When you write a create table script, it's going to succeed or it's going to fail when you define the script. It's not going to break when you roll it out. because if you've defined the script correctly and it's in source control and you've tested it, it's going to work. You don't need to have a test to validate that that table that you got created. It's going to just work. But there is stuff that could break. You could have data migration processes, data loading processes. Those are places where I would suggest that you write a test. Also, when you start doing testing for databases, one test at a time, please. Don't try to sit down and write 10,000 tests. Write one. You know, the first time you've got an error in production rolled out, you go, oh, crud, if only I'd had a test. Ah, bing, there's your first test. Let's put that test in. And also remember that any build that you do and any deployment that you do in anything prior to production, those are also tests. If you're able to successfully update a database with data in it without losing that data, that's a test, baby. So you've done a test and you've got some stuff going. So don't feel that you need to sit down and do what I did, which is write a test for every single object. It will really slow you down and hurt you. But do identify the things that are likely to break, the problems that are likely to occur, and create tests that you can run against those. And then you will automate running the tests as you do your deployments. Each deployment will run a full suite of tests, and you'll run those as you go out the door to ensure that you're protecting your production environment. So we're back on the wheel. We've gone from development to build to validate and test, and now we're going to talk about package. Packaging is basically putting all of the changes into one set. And I strongly, strongly recommend that you put application and database together as a common deployment. Further, my big suggestion is that the database goes first. Now, my joking answer to why the database goes first is because, of course, the database is more important. But my actual answer as to why you put the database first is because the database is more difficult to roll back. And if the database breaks, you want to roll back immediately. You do not want to wait to do rollbacks on the database. How you do rollbacks is a discussion that we could have if we have enough time. I won't get into that right now. But the idea is that the databases are more difficult to roll back, so deploy them first, even though we're deploying everything together. But the whole idea here is that what we want to do is package things up together so that version 1.1 of everything goes together. So you're not at version 1.33 of the application and version 2.75 of the database. That's going to create confusion. And we don't, one of the things that we're doing in a DevOps environment is collaboration and communication, right? And so this is part of that process, packaging things up to a known definition, branching things together when we branch our source control. All of this stuff is part of communicating together, collaborating together to arrive at a common process. So we're back on the wheel. We're going to release. And the releases, it's down to, you know, your system, your way. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. It should be marked within your source control environment. So we're saying version 1.1 looks like this. And the idea is that it's for clarity. And further, I would make darn sure that when you create releases, that you've got some way to mark your database. I like using extended properties on the database. It's a great way to mark it without creating new objects or new tables. I know people have, and I've done it too. I've created a table in the past, and then every release we inserted a new row into the table. And then you've got a history of releases and all that fun stuff. But I found that just kind of be sloppy. It didn't work that well for me. But you know, again, to each his own. But mark it in some way so that you know what it is that you've released. You know what version the database is. You can go and validate. Hey, I think the database is at 1.1. Let me check. Sure enough, it's at 1.1. Cool. Or I think the database is at 1.1 and it's at 0.9. Oh no, this is the beta. How the heck did this happen? Right? What process did we break? You've got information that you can use for troubleshooting. You just got to make sure that when you do this, that you're still doing all your releases come out of source control. I've seen people like, oh yeah, we're gonna mark this, we're gonna mark that, and then when we finally get up to the end, we're gonna start manually doing all kinds of scripting and stuff, and it'll fix everything, and it'll all be fine, and we'll know what's going on, and we'll remember that we made these changes. And oh my God, no. Everything has to go through the same process every time. The release process should be what crosses environments, right? Inside of Dev, we can make 27,000 changes. That's not a release. A release is going from dev to QA. A release is going from QA to financial testing. A release is going from financial testing to performance testing. A release is going from there to pre-production. Whatever you've defined your environment processing as, each cross of an environment should involve validation, each cross of an environment should involve testing, and each cross of an environment should be a distinct marked release so that you can know what version is where. And so now we're still back into our production environment now.
Grant?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I have a question if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So Hiram asks, who should write the tests, a QA resource or a dev resource? How can you offload the test code work to another resource to further focus on feature sets? Can you specify certain releases to auto rollback versus others to be?
Okay, that's like 20 questions. Let's go one at a time.
Okay, yeah, we'll go with the first. Who should write the tests?
Who should write the tests? Honestly,
yeah.
Honestly, that's something that you guys will decide when you sit down and work out through your process. There's going to be certain tests that are dev focused and should be written by developers. There's going to be certain tests that are QA, quality assurance, which is different, right, than unit tests. There's certain tests that are going to be QA focused and they should be written by the QA team. There's frankly certain tests that should be written by the database team, independent of either of those two other teams. But you're going to figure out which of those is which and which one goes where in your own environment. My strongest recommendation is all the unit tests should be inside of the dev environment. You should have a continuous integration process inside of development before you go to QA, before you start creating releases, right? You're inside of dev making these changes, and then all the tests run there. All right, next question.
All right, so how can you offload the test code work to another resource to further focus on feature sets?
Well, again, if we're doing agile and lean and we're using a test-driven methodology, you're going to write some tests yourself. You can't offload them. It has to be part of what you're doing. You're at the code. You're writing the code. You need to write the test. That's kind of how that works. Then there are functional tests, quality assurance tests that come later. Those should be offloaded to other resources.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next question.
There's two more here. It's all the same person. He put it all in one thing.
That's fine.
Can you specify certain releases to auto rollback versus others to be manual rollback?
Rollback. Let's save, rollback is a really ugly topic. Let's save that until at the end. If we have time, we'll come back to that, okay?
Okay. Last one then. If all IT teams work as DevOps resources, how can you compensate individuals based on skill sets versus responsibilities over a common goal?
Well, because remember that there are still specialization, right? I'm a database developer. I'm going to be the guy that 98% of the code, let's say, is generated by an ORM tool. Okay, cool. 2% of the code is not going to work well out of that ORM tool. You come to me for 2% of the code, and I'm the specialist. I'm the guy who can make that 2% scream. I can write it correctly. I can make it work right, and I'm going to get paid for that. I promise you. And you're going to want to pay me. Believe me. So it's not about everyone does everything. It's that we're all on a common team. Now, I do not know SANS to save my life, but SAN administration would be part of my DevOps processing to ensure that, as we're moving out, we're ensuring that we've got space available, that it's configured correctly and all this fun stuff. That's going to be part of the process. It's part of the ops side of the team. Those guys will get paid and compensated based on their specialties and based on their contributions. Developers, there's going to be some low-level developer guy who's writing, drop-down boxes, right? That's all he does is he builds the drop-down boxes, and he's good at it, but we're not going to pay him a whole lot. And then there's the really hardcore developers who are putting together algorithms, in ways that no one's ever done before, and we're going to pay them more, right? None of this changes so much your day-to-day work, but it does change. What's changing is how you communicate, how you collaborate, and how you hand things off. So we're no longer this idea of like the developers go away for 6 months and then they come back and hand me this giant steaming pile of brown stuff that I have to then decipher. I'm working with the development team for that 6 months. If that's our cycle, if our cycle is 6 months, I mean, that's kind of long, but that's fine. It's just about, the whole idea is collaboration and communication, not that now I'm a developer too. My specialty is databases. It really is. And you're going to pay me for that specialty. Any other questions around that stuff?
No, nope. He said great answers. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So we're back on the wheel. In production, we're going to monitor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on monitoring. I heard a story today. I couldn't believe it. I'll just share it with you because it's really funny. One of our sales people was talking to a company and they had like 300 instances of SQL Server. And, they're saying, well, how are you monitoring today? And they said, well, we're not. And we're like, well, how do you know if the servers are up or down or what's happening? And they said, well, mainly hope and prayer. Oh my God.
Really?
Yeah, for real. So hopefully you guys are putting monitoring in place. Monitoring is actually a part of the DevOps process because we want to be monitoring before we deploy, so that when we deploy, we see what happens. If it passes or fails, we can see that because we're keeping an eye on the servers. After we deploy, we're keeping an eye on the servers so that we know, if it's caused issues. And then finally, monitoring is going to drive innovation and tuning, which puts us back on the wheel again, so that we're looking at processing. Now, the last bit of the wheel is provisioning. It's fundamental to shift left, and it's all about getting that production-like environment into development. And you want to automate this because you want it to be completely self-service. Development teams are going to be, within development, the development teams are going to be on a cycle and a schedule that would, scare the hell out of you if you thought about doing it in your production environment, most of us. And that's fine. But we want to make it so that they can do their stuff as fast as possible. We want them to completely do anything they want within their environment, but we are not sacrificing protection. We're going to provision, we're going to create copies of the database, copies of our environments, but those copies are going to be clean. We're going to remove email, phone numbers, personally identifying information, any kind of financial information that we're not allowed to share, right? All that kind of stuff is going to get removed, modified, masked through some process. There are good processes, there are bad processes, there are semi-manual processes. Whatever you guys do, automate as much as you can. I would automate, especially provisioning. I would automate the entire thing if you can, but you cannot sacrifice protection at this point. And this is all about getting a shift left copy of the database, but it's got to be a clean copy. How are we doing on time? Okay, fine. Toys. Are there any questions about the process before we go and look at the toys?
I don't see any other questions in here, but I'm more interested in toys.
Okay, everyone's interested in toys, so let's go talk toys. Where is it? There it is. All right, this is Management Studio. I'm sure some of you have seen it before. SQL Server Management Studio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a procedure. We'll call it DBO.DevOps. Virtual group. All right. As we'll do select star from the movie table. Okay. Everyone okay with that? Oops. That was, there we go. And we'll go ahead and remove that because that causes problems. Cool. Now I'm going to create that store procedure. What I'm doing here is I'm modifying my database. So I've got a movie management database. Let me show it to you over here. I've got my movie management database, and that's my dev environment, right? It's my local machine. Think about it as like I'm a developer. I'm on my local machine. this is my copy of it, and so I can play it with it in here and make whatever kind of changes I want. And if we go down and look at programmability and store procedures, we'll see a whole series of store procedures, but we'll see the DevOps VG store procedure. So the DevOps virtual group store procedure that I just created has been added to this database, right? So it's local. Now I've got multiple copies here of the movie management database. You can see movie management shadow, movie management dev integration, movie management dev integration shadow. Don't worry about those yet. What those represent is other environments. So imagine I'm going from movie management to dev integration. Imagine I'm going from movie management to production. So this is dev to dev integration to production, that kind of stuff. But because I'm doing this all locally, I've got one server, so you're only going to see multiple copies of the database. But in a real production environment, it wouldn't look like that. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I have a question here if you have time.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, so Chris says, say we have version 2.7 in dev, 2.6 in QA, 2.5 in financial test, 2.4 in pre-prod, and 2.3 in prod.
Is there going to be a test later? Do I have to remember all this?
When a critical bug is found in prod, which is 2.3, that has to be fixed and then has to be changed in an all newer version, does this create more work when we are agile, as now we have to have more releases to fix because we cycle so fast?
Okay, so all right, I'm going to take a minute to answer this. I'm going to answer it as fast as possible, so listen close. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to create a branch of our code from version 2.3 because we know exactly where that's at in source control. We're able to go in there, find that version, branch that code. We will do hot fixes to the code directly in 2.3. That means we will create a branch of the database in our dev environment. We'll validate that that hotfix worked inside of dev. We will then create a release for that branch to go from dev to QA, QA to pre-prod, pre-prod to financial testing to whatever, and then off to production so that we've updated version 2.3. And we will do that completely independently and as fast as we have to in order to protect and move stuff into production. And that's going to be in a separate branch, right? That's going to be the hotfix branch. Then that branch has to get merged into all the other versions that you just talked about. And that's how that works. That's how that's going to happen. And are there 150 details I left out in that description? Yes. But we'll keep going from there.
He says, thanks, Grant, makes sense.
Okay, cool. Now I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio. I'm using a free tool that's inside of Visual Studio. It's called ReadyRoll. And ReadyRoll is down here at the bottom of my screen. And all I'm using this for is it's a shortcut, makes my life easy. This is available for you guys if you have Visual Studio Enterprise Edition. It's right there and free. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit refresh. I shouldn't say free. It's built into Visual Studio Enterprise. It's not a free tool. It's part of Visual Studio Enterprise. So what it's going to do is I hit refresh, and it's identified that I've got to change. I've added this DevOps VG store procedure. You guys saw me add that procedure. So what I'm going to do is I've got this is inside of my Visual Studio project. I'm going to import and generate the script. Zoom back out. And that's going to open up over here. And you guys can see that as well. Let me zoom back in. So you guys saw that I created that store procedure, and now that same store procedure I created is created in this script. So what I've done is I've now pulled a script, a set of changes, a migration script, right? This is one change, and I've pulled that into my project here in Visual Studio. And the reason I've done that is because Visual Studio is what I'm using to manage what goes in and out of my source control system. So I've created the store procedure, I've validated that it works, I'm all happy with it. I'm going to go to source control, I'm going to commit this change, right? Nice and simple, nothing complex. Let me zoom in so you guys can see what's going on. And by the way, yes, this is the second tool I'm using out of very, very many that you will see here. The one thing you're going to find anytime you start looking at DevOps processes, especially automation across builds, is you're going to see lots and lots and lots of moving parts. And I wish there was a way to simplify it, but we're talking about automating, all kinds of various things from one place to another through source control, and there's really not any single tool that does it all. I'm using one tool, ReadyRoll, to get stuff out of the database and into source control. I'm using another tool, which is GitHub, to manage my source control system. So we're going to make a change for a demo. It's all good. I'm going to commit the change to my source control system. Okay. You always want to make sure you comment these, because that's something that's going to, come back to haunt you if you make changes and you don't know why. Now you'll see right here it says the commit has been created locally. Sync to share your changes with the server. Now normally you would go. Normally I would not immediately sync. Normally I go back to work and I make another change. Right? I add a column to the table. I do some other store procedure. I do a view. I do something else. For demo purposes, I'm going to immediately sync my changes. So I'm going to click on sync. And so this is all about Git and GitHub. I'm going to push my changes up to my change management. Now, right now, there's a few of you out there that are Git masters and are looking at the fact that I'm on the master branch, and you're freaking out. Calm down. I know that in a real environment, we create multiple branches on the fly, and I would not normally do this the way I've done it. But this is just a demo, right? As I say, it's a demo. It's all good. So I'm going to do a push to put the changes that I've made up into the current branch. And so all I've done with you guys right here is I've gone in, I've created a store procedure, I've taken that store procedure, I've put it into a script, I've taken that script, I've added it to my source control system, and I've pushed it up to my source control system master, all as part of a process to ensure that I've got my database changes in source control. Now, that's all cool. We need to test these things. Nothing I've done here is a test, right? This is all, it worked on my machine, which is absolute crap, right? That is not an adequate answer to anything. So we need to add tests into our system. Now, right now, I am using, I need Chrome. Hang on, there we go. I am using Team Foundation Server. I'm using Team Foundation System. Are there other things you could use? There's Git, there's Jenkins, there's Team City, there's Octopus. Any one of these things is great. They're really great products. I'm just using Visual Studio because I'm a Microsoft nerd. What can I tell you? They've been paying my salary indirectly for a number of years, and so I just keep using their tools because they work. And so the whole Team Foundation server, there's a team build, team deploy, build and release, and all these fun things. There's also ways to control your work, control who has access to whatever, and all of it works with GitHub, so you don't even have to use nasty old Microsoft stuff anymore. You can actually use GitHub, which is wonderful. I'm not that big a Microsoft nerd. Anyway, you know that I've checked code in, so let's take a look and see. I'm just going to refresh the screen here. And you can see that I've done a good, there it is, making a change for a demo. It's all good. That has actually gone up into my code system. You guys can now see the change. Now, if we take a look, I am also doing automated builds. Let's go over here and refresh the build screen. And what's happened is that we've checked in code, and I'm going to click on it. As part of checking in code, I've got a build process that runs immediately. And what that build process does is it finds any code that has been checked in, it checks it out, it runs it on a different database, validates that code ran, and then based on whether or not it passes any of the tests that I've set up, it lets me know that, hey, you've done a build, that build succeeded. So I've got a full set of integration testing running on my code as we do it. Now the fun thing is you can take a look at it. It builds artifacts. Now you're going to be crazed and amazed by what you see here. But what happens is that it builds these artifacts, and what's the artifact? some tests, some pre-deployment scripts to validate things, and then right down here, look what we did. Oh, create proc, DevOps VG. So all we've done here is create a mechanism for creating the objects that we set up inside of our database. The other things that it's doing is it's marking the database and putting the versions and all that fun stuff. We can take a look at database difference, what happened before and what happened after. All these kinds of things are generated by the build process, so you can see the changes as they're going out the door if you want to. But notice, all of this is automated. I haven't done any of these things that you're seeing manually. The only thing I did manually was make the code change and put it into my source control system. That bit was manual. Everything else is happening automatically. And so you can also see that it's using that shadow build to make these comparisons and do this processing, okay? And that's how that happens. Now, normally, that would be it. Normally, we wouldn't do any more until we're ready to go to QA. But for demo purposes, I have also automated my releases. So once a build is successful on my system, the way it's set up right now, and this is not what you would do. Normally, you would wait until you've accumulated a series of builds and say, okay, we're ready to go to QA for testing on release 1.1, and then you would package up that set of builds as one release, and then off it would go. What I'm doing is every single build is also a release. That's not normal. That is a demo thing only. It's almost like using AdventureWorks, right? We only do this in demos. But you can see that it's successfully built that second database. So I have moved from production to QA effectively. Think of it like that. And all through automated processes, all through stuff that's set up inside of Visual Studio. Nothing I've done here is separate from Visual Studio. It's all built in. It's all part of the Team Foundation server and Visual Studio. So it's no shocks, no surprises. And yeah, it's all on my own server, scarydba.visualstudio.com, but it's projects that I built up and set up. You guys would have to do your own processing. But you can see that it's really not that hard to set this stuff up. Now, the one thing you would have to do that I don't show here is, let's see, do I have the, yeah, I can show it. I've got an agent that you have to get configured and set up. That comes from Visual Studio itself. So that agent is going to run on any of the machines that are acting as your build processing. So if you've got a web server or whatnot, you may have to put, in dev or QA or wherever you're going to do this automated stuff at, you're going to have to put an agent in place so that the online stuff that I'm using here, and by the way, this was all set up in the United States, and I'm demoing this to you from the UK right now. That's the beauty of having this kind of online processing. But you're going to have to install agents on some of your machines so that the online processing has a mechanism for communicating back and forth. But that's just a question of going there and doing the download and doing the configuration. Pretty easy stuff. But there's a lot of moving parts. What's the recommendation? Start with getting your database in source control. Step one, and then step through slowly. Okay. Any questions on any of the tools that I just showed?
I have no questions at this moment.
Okay, cool. So the idea here for DevOps is we're going to go around this wheel around and round and round over and over and over again. It's never going to stop. But we're going to automate as much of this processing as we possibly can. The build, validation, and testing, the packaging, the releasing, all can occur in an automated fashion. Now, we can even put checkpoints in there that will send an email. Hey, Grant, a new release is ready to go to pre-prod. Could you go and review the T-SQL script? If you want to still put that Mark 1 eyeball onto the T-SQL, and you saw we can open it up and take a look at it. If you want to do that, you absolutely can. You can get right in there and scroll around and read through the T-SQL and say, okay, you know what, I like this, approve the thing, and then it will automatically deploy. So you've got customizable, fully controlled and fully automatable processing that will allow you to add protection to your production environment. And that's what we're all talking about when we're doing DevOps. I've got these slides are already available on slideshare.net. You guys can go up and download them. And they've got links to these recommendations I've got for reading. The one thing I will add for the recommended reading list is there's a book called The Phoenix Project. It's a little bit long in the tooth these days. Some of the technology they refer to is a little older, but the processing is very much about agile and lean. It's a novel, believe it or not, but it's a great read, mainly because I feel like I've worked with all these people, even though they're fictional. It's really a pretty amazing read. And if you're trying to get this idea your head wrapped around this idea, it's a great way to to read it. So hopefully we talked about the methods, the approaches to move towards database-centric applications, and hopefully we've talked about some of the best practices that'll help you ensure what's going on. I'll just put this up again here at the end. It's 5 o'clock. We would normally quit immediately. I'm available here for another 5 minutes if you guys want to ask a couple of questions.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions here. So one is from Chris. Just to confirm, when you say get database into source control, you mean everything except data, correct?
Everything except data, but even data, there are code tables and lookup tables that I would consider, and I use that word very carefully, that I would consider putting into source control. It depends. I'm going to fall back on the good DBA answer. It depends, but there is some data that I would consider putting in source control, but mainly small data sets, very small, strict control stuff like lookup tables. Province lists, country lists, stuff that changes some but doesn't change radically, and if it changes, we kind of want to version it. That kind of stuff, small data sets, your normal data set, the 20 million customers that you guys have. No, don't put that in production. I don't want, in source control. Nobody wants that.
Okay. And as asked pretty much the same question, he phrased it differently, but it was pretty much the same question. So that looks like it's
okay.
it. So Grant, if you have just
cool.
If you have just a quick moment, I could use your help because one of the parts of this was giving out a $125 gift card. However, there are people that I know.
Yeah.
There are people that I know here in the meeting. Some of them are my employees, so I don't want to play favorites. So if you would, wait, I've got another question if you don't mind here. Should we put in the source control data from lookup tables? Yeah. So it's kind of the same question again. He's saying, should we put data from lookup tables like address types, phone types into source control? And
yeah, I would. And have done so. I would. I've also hit a situation. We had a company, enterprise level code tables lookup system that was, the requirements were so complex that we had to build a full app and a full deployment mechanism just for lookup tables in order for us to be able to version them across applications, across environments. It was a flipping nightmare. But you can do that too. I don't recommend it, but we had to do it. It was the requirements around code table management were so stringent and so involved that we built an app just for managing code tables.
Okay, so I think we'll put an end to the questions there then.
Okay.
Could you give me a way? Do you want one of the people to ask questions? I'm sorry, say that.
How many people are there?
48 attendees still on the.
48 attendees still online. Number 47.
Okay, Varsham Papakian. Okay.
Cool. That was easy.
That was easy. All right, I will contact Varsham and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks for listening, and thanks, Bill, for organizing this thing.
Well, thank you very much, Grant. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Cool. Talk to you guys later.
Yep, bye.
Bye.
So, guys, for whomever's still on here, Varsham, if you can hear me, email devops@pass.org, and you can email me email me and I will be able to get you the information to get your gift card, okay? So Varsham, if you can hear me, can you say something, or can you, here, I'll unmute you. I unmuted you, Varsham. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Okay. So Grant said you won the gift card. So if you can email me at devops@pass.org, then I can get the information of the gift card to you.
Could you repeat the email again? Sorry.
DevOps at
Yes.
pass.org.
Pass.org, right? Okay.
Yep. Works.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day, guys, and thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.